So welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here. This is Carl Bowman, President of USCutter, and I'd really like to thank you for joining us with this webinar on digital garment printing with ChromaBlast. I think you're going to find it incredibly informative. We have Jimmy Lamb, who's Sawgrass's Manager of Communication and Education. And he's really going to take us through kind of a 101 class on what sublimation printing and decorating is all about. I know when I first heard about this particular topic, I was always a little bit confused with what exactly sublimation is and how it works with T-shirts. So I'll probably be jumping in here and there throughout the seminar, and I'll be available after Jimmy is done with his presentation to answer some follow-up questions that you may have about digital decoration and some of the systems that USCutter has to offer. So with that, Jimmy, it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Carl, and I'm glad to be here today to conduct this webinar. Some of you out there may already know who I am because I do seem to get around, but I do speak at a lot of the trade shows out there and do a lot of articles for impressions and printwear and stitches and ASI and a whole bunch of different things. Just real quickly, my background is mostly in apparel decoration. I started out as an embroiderer and then moved into other areas, including digital, and along the way learned how to do digital transfers, which we're really going to talk about today, sublimation, direct-to-garment, all kinds of different things. The one area I'm not very proficient, though, is screen printing, and luckily we're not talking about screen printing. I did just enough screen printing to decide that's not really what I wanted to do. So we're going to talk about digital garment printing using a product that Sawgrass produces and USCutter sells called ChromaBlast. Now, if you're not familiar with Sawgrass, we are a manufacturer of digital printing technologies and inks, and we produce various inks used on different types of things for digital printing, and then companies like USCutter are our dealers who actually go out and sell these products to you, and they sell them in packaged format, including things like a printer and papers and whatnot. We'll talk about that as we go. In fact, USCutter has a couple of nice packages we'll show you at the end in case you're interested in adding digital garment printing using ChromaBlast to your operation. Now, a couple of things before we get rolling here. Number one, the audio is one way, which means you can hear me, hopefully, but I can't hear you. And the way that you communicate is that you actually have a chat box. And if you look at the top right-hand corner of your screen, you should see a red rectangle with a white arrow. By clicking on that, it opens up a window where you can type in your questions. Now, my preference is to wait until the end. And if you actually have a question as we're going, you're welcome to go ahead and type it in. I may not actually address a question until we get to the end, but when it comes to mind, you want to type it in, go ahead and do that. Typically, I turn my control panel off so that I can see the screen better because I have a huge control panel with lots of different controls in it and lots of different buttons. And I like to get that kind of out of the way because it's distracting during a webinar. Therefore, I wouldn't see your question when it comes in. So I don't want you to feel like you're being ignored, but as something comes to mind, feel free to go ahead and put it in, and then we'll get to it when we get to our question answer session. Okay, with that said, let's get rolling here. So if you go out and look at the traditional methods of apparel decoration, we refer to these as analog, mainly because they're kind of like very involved in the steps that take place. For example, embroidery and screen printing are probably the two most predominant forms of apparel decoration traditionally, not necessarily today, but traditionally out there. And both of them have they're great applications, but they both have some limitations, okay? For example, with embroidery, you have to worry about art preparation. You can't just use any image. It has to really be specifically edited for stitching purposes. And I'm not talking about creating a stitch file that you can run with an embroidery machine. I'm talking about you actually have to modify the artwork because a lot of detail cannot be reproduced. And you certainly can't have more colors in it than the number of needles on a given machine. So first of all, we got to do a lot of art prep, and then we have to digitize it to actually be able to run it on a machine. And then production, though it seems fast, if anybody out there is an embroidery, 1,000 stitches per minute sounds fast until you have to do a 10,000 stitch design. And it takes, at least 10 minutes, probably closer to 15. So, you know what? It is the slowest decoration process. And as a result, most embroiderers are finding a lot of limitations, mainly in design size. because typically we don't see large designs done with embroidery anymore. We just see small designs because it keeps the cost down, because the time's down. So I know a lot of embroiderers, and you may be one of those, are looking for alternative methods of decoration like digital printing, because it opens up the doors for you. Now, if you look at screen printing, the other traditional method out there, again, art preparation is a pretty long and tedious process. You got to break the colors, the design down by colors, and then your machine or equipment limits you to how many colors you can actually reproduce because of the number of stations that you have and whatnot. So you definitely have a color limitation. Your setup is pretty long and involved because you got to do this color separations, you got to build the screens, you got to stretch them, you got to align them, you got to do your emulsions, all that wonderful stuff to get on the machine before you can print the first shirt. And so if you're doing a manual press, very labor intensive because you're moving squeegees by hand. If you have an automatic press, well, that's an expensive machine, but then it moves the squeegees kind of like for you. All you got to do is load it and unload it. So if you're a screen printer, you know what I'm talking about. If not, maybe you have an idea. Both these methods have been very popular methods, but like I said, there's a lot of drawbacks into what they can do and how cheaply or how time involved that can be. For example, most screen printers, yes.
Oh, this is Carl again. I just wanted to jump in there to piggyback on something that Jimmy said. The other thing is a lot of you that may have a vinyl cutter and you're starting out your business with. One thing nice about a vinyl cutter is you don't need a lot of space to get into business and start up. With screen printing and or embroidery, it takes a tremendous amount of space.
Yes.
For ventilation, just for the equipment and everything. With digital decoration, again, you're going to be extremely efficient and compact with the size. You're not going to need to make any extra space in your shop or where you're producing things to be able to do this.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, especially with screen printing. By the time you have the press in there, you have a dryer in there, you have your screen staging area. There's a lot that goes into it. And certainly it's the predominant method of doing T-shirts traditionally, but just because of the labor involved, it's not the type of thing where you want to do a dozen. And more we're seeing people, they want a dozen, they want 2 dozen, and they want full color. And those screen printing's capable, it's not cost effective. So that becomes a big limitation for screen printers, which brings us to the digital advantage. So when we start talking about digital printing, a big key factor for digital, but that kind of separates it from everything else, is the factor that we're doing everything through the computer. And sure, you're setting up artwork and everything for screen printing and for embroidery through your computer. But here it's different. For example, one of the things is colors. Both those processes have a lot of limits. And pretty much you're unlimited with color when you go into digital. And the interesting thing here is with digital, in most cases, we're putting 4 colors of ink into a printer, and then we're combining those in different recipes, essentially, to be able to reproduce literally millions of colors. It's kind of like going down to Home Depot and watching the guys mix the paint. Okay, they mix it to your standard, and they have a recipe that produces the color that you wish. In our case, all the colors in the design, we're actually producing the ink variations for them digitally. So that gives us wide open abilities, okay, because suddenly we can do unlimited colors on a shirt. Well, we really can't do that with screen printing, and we can't do that with embroidery. So other advantages of digital, it's a quick setup process. A lot of your clients already have good quality artwork that they're presenting to you in a digital file format. Of course, the unlimited colors, low production costs, and you're going to see just how low here in just a minute. No special skills required. Yeah, certainly got to learn how to use a computer, and there's a little training, as always, a little learning curve, but not that difficult. Okay, especially compared to something like digitizing for embroidery, doing color separations for screen printing. And it's the ideal short-run production solution, because with digital, if you have a good quality piece of artwork and you already you're set up, you can sit here, load it in the computer, print it out in about 30 seconds, okay, a nice-sized image, and then go put it under a heat press with, and transfer it onto a shirt in about a minute's worth of time. So maybe you got, your production is about 2 minutes. You spend some time doing the artwork, but pretty quick, we can get that thing set up and start printing. So we can start doing T-shirts pretty darn quick. So when that customer comes in and says, listen, I just need to get 24 shirts for a special event, you're like, hey, no problem. If they have the image ready, you're ready to start printing, okay? So digital opens the doors to a totally new world. Now, before we really talk about digital transfers, a lot of people, when they hear digital, they think direct-to-garment printing. and they associate everything with direct-to-garment printing. And everybody thinks they want to do direct-to-garment printing right up to the point that they find out how much that costs. The concept of direct-to-garment printing is that it's a specially built, custom-built inkjet printer designed specifically for apparel. So that means that they design a machine from the ground up. They basically mount a T-shirt on the platen that goes into the machine, and it has an inkjet system that sprays, probably a bad choice of words, applies the digital inks to the garment, and that's the T-shirt comes out. I mean, that's pretty much how it works. Good simplification, but that's how it works. So on the surface, the process is quicker, a lot simpler than screen printing, and it's getting a lot of press. I mean, people are saying, hey, I want to get the direct-to-garment printer, and then they go shopping and they find out these things start at about $16,000, run up to, there's a good mid-range at $50,000, and then there's actually some $100,000 printers out there that are really good machines, okay? But who has $100,000 to go put into a T-shirt printer? I mean, I guess somebody does. I don't. So, are there alternatives? I mean, direct-to-garment printing made a big impact, but it's got a pretty big price point too on there. Okay, now direct-to-garment printing, basically you set up a design in a computer, you output it to that direct-to-garment printer, or DTG printer for short, and then it prints directly to the shirt, and then you apply heat to that shirt. And the reason you're doing the heat is to cure the inks. So in this process, it's 3 steps: the computer, the printer, and either a heat press or a dryer. You have a garment dryer because you're a screen printer. Either way, you have to cure the ink in that 3-step process. Okay, that's it in a nutshell. But there's a lot of limitations to DTG when you start shopping, and probably the number one for people right now is the startup costs are quite high, as I mentioned. And you have to consider that. What's my ROI on this? Printing can take several minutes, depending on how large a design is and how much color saturation is required. It can easily take several minutes. You hear a lot of numbers like everything takes a minute or a minute and a half, but on average it takes 2+ minutes to do a T-shirt, maybe even more. Depends on the DTG unit as well. One of the things you don't hear much about is a head to surface distance. The distance between the inkjet print head and the surface of the garment is critical. If you got too much distance, your ink is not going to disperse properly, and it's going to affect the quality of the image. Too close, it can actually smear. And as long as you got a really flat surface like a T-shirt and it's stretched properly and put in there, that's step one. Step number 2 is on the machines you have to adjust that distance based on the thickness of the garment. Now, there's one in particular I've used that has an electronic eye that scans the surface and automatically adjusts the height of the platen in relationship to the head. And I've seen other ones where you have hand knobs where you got to adjust it yourself. So these are something you got to think about. Each different shirt thickness, we have to change that distance head to surface. One of the things you don't hear a lot. Okay, we got to maintain that all the time. That's an important aspect of DTG. You're going to find that ink quality varies greatly with brand, and you're pretty much forced into buying that ink with that brand. And a lot of people aren't looking at the quality of the ink; they're looking at the DTG itself, and and then they end up with an ink that maybe they don't really feel like it really does the job that they're looking for. And some machines even require pre-treatments where you actually have to spray the garment with a chemical so that the ink adheres to it properly. So these are just things to be aware of. I mean, I'm not knocking them. I mean, obviously, plenty of people are using them, but it's just like being aware of what you're up against if you're out there doing some shopping, looking for a way to be able to start doing T-shirts in your shop. But what if you could digitally print without a DTG? Like I said, too many people think digital printing is only available through a direct-to-garment printing, and that's simply not true. We have something called digital transfers. And I know when I say digital transfers, are you the worst transfer? There's a lot of different people have a lot of different pictures in their head of what a transfer actually is, okay? And you see the terms get used a lot of different ways, and how I'm using it today might be different from how you hear from other people. Now, when I look at old school transfers, I think of these emblems, and basically images were printed on that emblem, and it was a real rubbery looking emblem at that, okay, kind of a rubbery, shiny looking thing. And I remember you could go down to the beach and you go in a T-shirt shop, and they would have blank shirts, and they'd have bins full of different designs, and you choose the design you want, and they would have put it on the heat press. Well, the problem was with this old school technology that's, you saw it 20 years ago when it kind of first came out, they didn't last very long. They didn't adhere very well, and they would crack and peel, and they were, you know what, the quality wasn't there. So a lot of times when you hear the word transfer, you get this awful look in, on your face because you're thinking about that old school. But transfers of today have progressed tremendously, tremendously. And for our first part of the discussion, we're talking about digital transfers. And what a digital transfer is, we're using a heat release method. What we're doing is we're actually printing an image onto a special heat release paper, and we apply the paper to the surface of the garment that we're decorating, and then using heat and pressure from a heat press over a short period of time, it'll cause those inks to actually migrate off the transfer paper into the surface of the garment. Okay, and then you pull the paper off. Well, you remove the heat, pull the paper off, throw the paper away. So in this particular case, the transfer paper is discarded after the process. Okay, and you leave behind an image that's really embedded in the fabric rather than on top. A lot of processes we're putting things right there on top. Screen printing is on top. If you're doing vinyl letters and tackle twill, these type of materials, using typically an adhesive backing, you're applying it with a heat press, and it's on top of the surface. This is actually, if you rub your hands on it, you can just barely feel that ink because it's down in the surface, which means it lasts a good bit longer. It certainly can't peel off because it's actually recoloring the fibers. Okay, so when done properly, a digital transfer looks every bit as good, if not better, than what DTG printers are doing. I mean, when I'm doing live seminars, I have an example of a design that was done with a digital transfer and also done with a DTG printer. And the actual digital transfer, same design, same shirt, is actually a little bit brighter than the DTG was. So what we're getting at is this is a very bona fide way of doing things and getting that really good, sharp, crisp color transfer that you're looking for quickly and easily. Now, with heat-activated digital transfers, there are two options. One is to outsource, and there are systems. If you have a heat press, you can find companies that can make the transfer for you, and then they ship it to you, and you put it on. Okay, but most people would rather produce it in-house, because by producing it in-house, you have total control over what you're doing. Like I said, you got some places out there online that will do some really nice things for you, but you have minimums you have to deal with, and if you don't like them, they can't be edited. I mean, once they're printed, they're printed. So by doing it in-house, you'll find out it's relatively inexpensive and quite simple to do it. It really just requires a computer, and raise your hand if you don't have a computer. Okay, so I'm sure you do. Requires a graphics program. Let's see, Photoshop, CorelDRAW, Illustrator, things that you're already using. Requires an inkjet printer that is loaded with and compatible with the inks required to do the printing, and a heat press. Okay, so it's a fairly low investment, fairly easy to do. And the production is actually a three-step process. It looks like this. Step one is to create the design. And as I was saying, you're using your standard software that you probably already have, okay? And you're going to create that image on screen, and you have to have a pretty decent image, okay? I mean, you can get really good-looking quality prints, but only if you started with good-looking quality artwork, because garbage in equals garbage out certainly applies here. And one of the things is people say, well, what's the proper resolution? Well, it's important to understand that resolution is tied to design size. For example, if I tell you 350 dpi would be good, you want to make sure that the customer is giving you the 350 dpi at the size it needs to be printed. So, for example, if it's an 8-inch by 10-inch print on a T-shirt at 350 dpi, that's definitely plenty of resolution. You could still have a poor quality design. Higher DPI doesn't always mean that you got a good quality design. Okay, but by the same token, if someone gives you an image that's 4 inches by 4 inches at 350 dpi, and then you increase the size of the image, say to 8 by 10 or whatever, so that you can put it on the T-shirt, guess what? Your DPI is going to drop tremendously, and it's going to get that fuzzy, pixelated look. So you need to make sure you're starting with good quality artwork before you even start this process. Now, just as important, we're going to output it, and we have to put it into the right kind of printer. Now, the printers that USCutter is carrying for this application are made by Ricoh. And Ricoh doesn't always ring a bell with people, but they've been making copy machines and printers for many, many, many years. Great quality product. Here on the screen is a Ricoh 3300, which is a nice, inexpensive unit, very quick. I'll show you some pricing in just a minute, and then at the end we'll show you some package pricing so you can understand that you're not talking about a $16,000 custom-built DTG. We're talking about an off-the-shelf office-style inkjet printer that's loaded up with the ChromaBlast inks, in this case, that Sawgrass manufactures. And they're just cartridges. You plug them in, and you hook it up to your computer. You don't have to rewire it or mechanically change anything. You do have a software driver you install on your computer, which helps you, manage getting the image from your computer into the printer and out through the inkjet. But that's really about it, okay? And that software program costs zilch, free, okay? That's nice. It's just a driver, all right? So we're going to print that out, and we have to print it out onto suitable transfer paper, okay? Unsuitable transfer paper would be like what's getting ready to disappear here off the screen, what you would buy from an office or craft store. They have these iron-on transfer products. You don't want to use that, okay? The guys at USCutter, they sell the complete package of paper, inks. You have to use the right quality paper or it's not going to work, okay? And the final step is your heat press. Some of you already have a heat press, okay? And that's really your biggest investment to do digital transfers is the heat press. You already have the heat press. You're talking about a very low investment to get into this. But you do want a good quality heat press if you haven't bought one already, one that has nice, even, consistent heating. And the guys at USCutter can tell you more about, the actual heat presses they carry. So that's an important aspect. So it's 3 simple steps. I mean, it's really easy. I can even do it. What does it cost? You get asked that all the time. Well, we took this image here, and it's a fairly intense image there. It came to us by Great Dane Graphics. It has a lot of good stock images there. And we set it up as an 8-inch by 10-inch. And we printed it with a Ricoh 3300, and it printed out in less than 30 seconds. So it's a pretty fast process, 30 seconds to print that on the transfer paper. And the cost was about $1.25 for the ink and the paper and all that together, okay? So not a bad rate. And when we're talking about, especially if you're going to start doing T-shirts using digital printing, a lot of jobs out there being in the 12 to 48 piece range, $1.25 worth of ink and paper is not that high in the grand scheme of things. And then when you can do 30 seconds worth of printing, and then you got to print in the heat press for about a minute, so you get about 1:30 in there. It's a pretty inexpensive, simple way. And one of the key things you find here is if you compare it to screen printing, I could probably produce, let's say, easily 48 shirts with my digital setup here in the same time it took me to set up a screen printing press, okay, because of how much downtime there is for something like screen printing. So this becomes that great short-run solution. And if you actually compare screen printing in price to, say, digital transfers, screen printing gets inexpensive when you're doing larger quantities, especially if we're talking about full color. You got to do larger quantities because they have a huge cost in downtime associated with the setup. So they have to do a fairly large quantity to be able to recoup that setup time. With digital, you do have a little bit higher price per piece, but you have almost no setup time such that you can get up and running quick, and you can do those smaller runs cheaper than the screen printers can. What does it cost to get into it? Well, we'll look a little more specifically at the end, but I can tell you, a range of getting into ChromaBlast with the printer, and maybe you need a heat press, maybe you don't. Okay, starts at about $550. I think that the guys at USCutter got a little better price than that, and runs up to roughly $1,800. And when you start comparing that to the price of a DTG printer, and I can go out and start printing T-shirts, tomorrow for that kind of cost, I mean, that's huge, absolutely huge when you actually look at it across the board. Okay, as I mentioned, you might be looking at it and say, I'll just get a heat press, I'll outsource, the imaging and whatnot. But you gotta consider some things when you're doing something in-house over outsourcing, especially with digital transfers. First of all, is you have total control over the quality of the image, which means that you can print it out, and if you don't quite like the shade, you can adjust the color and do another print and get it right. Once you send it off to somebody outsourcing it, they're going to send it to you. And if you don't like it, you're stuck with it pretty much, okay, unless they got a really liberal return policy. Turnaround time, another neat thing here is we can set up, if we got a decent image, we can set up and start printing in minutes instead of waiting for days or weeks when we're outsourcing to somebody else to do our transfers. Cost, you can do 1, or you can do 20, or you can do 100, I mean, whatever you want to do. But a lot of the firms that do it outsourcing require minimum orders. And finally, easy editing, man. If you spelled it wrong, or the customer gave it to you wrong, or you just want to change it, make it into a template, you're controlling all the artwork on the screen. The paper is just the receiver of that artwork. Once you let that artwork go off to an outsource, it's going to come back exactly how it went out, and you may be in trouble. Trust me, been there, done that. Okay, I also taking a quick look at digital transfers versus DTG printing. You know, on the surface, they do look very similar. Okay, and that's definitely to your advantage if you're looking at some type of digital way of printing. Both use inkjet printers to process the images. Both require the use of a heat source to cure the inks. Remember, with DTG, you have to use heat to cure it. With a digital transfer, you're actually using heat to transfer the image off the paper into the garment. Okay, and both produce full color designs with no limits to the number of colors. So, I mean, when you start making that kind of comparison, you start to say, well, gee, these are very, very similar in nature. But then they start to separate. First of all, DTG print time is slower. Typically, a DTG, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes for the same image that prints in 30 seconds and then heat cures in another minute. So you're really talking 1.5 to 2 minutes for a transfer. But DTG tends to be just a little bit longer for large images. Smaller images is going to go faster. Probably the biggest dividing point is that startup cost. I mean, most of us just really can't go jump into a machine that, you know, starts at $16,000, averages in the mid-20s, and then if you need white ink capabilities done properly, you're probably up about $50,000. Okay, so that's something you got to think about. You know, you may have that fabric pre-treatment, which is another step, which slows down the production. And finally, and I mentioned this before, but just as a refresher, that you got to have that precise distance between the print head and the garment surface. When you're doing transfers, you don't have to worry about that because on a transfer, we're printing the paper. The machines are already calibrated for paper, so the distance is set correct. And then when we put it on with a heat press, we're actually putting that transfer right against the surface, which is fine. That's where we want it, so we don't have to worry about that little aspect. Okay, printing on colored surfaces. Any kind of printing we do, okay, any kind of printing, starting with printing on paper with your office printer. White is the best color, okay, because when we print on white, it has no influence on the inks that are going onto it. All right, so I mean, it's a great test. Go print out a colored image, a photograph on white paper with your HP printer in your office, and then go print it on yellow paper. And you'll see that it looks different on yellow than it did on white paper. Now, the second thing there is, if you look at your printers, most of your printers don't have any type of white ink. And the way they reproduce white in an image is by leaving that area open so that you see the paper through there. Okay? I mean, that's just standard across the board, any kind of printing that's going on. Okay, the challenge becomes when you need white in your image on a colored background, some kind of color besides white, because essentially that background color is going to show through. Okay, for example, if you look here and we have on the right, you can see the eagle with the white there is on a white t-shirt. The white comes through, looks great. When we put him on a blue t-shirt, we see that he's not necessarily white anymore. Now, first of all, keep in mind that the number one color by far of any shirt that we print is white. And by doing digital transfers with a 4-color ink system, no white ink, you are able to produce white t-shirts all day long without any problem as far as having the color white. And if you want to go into some light colors and you don't have the color ink white, you know, you're going to have a problem. But if you don't need white, you may not have a problem. Okay, it has to come down with, do I need the white ink or not? Okay, to be able to shine through. So you'll hear lots of discussions out there in the industry about white ink and this, that, and the other. You know, you have to first ask a question. Not all DTGs have white ink. Keep that in mind. The most popular direct-to-garment printer out there, which is made by Brother, the GT541, does not have white ink. Okay, but yet it's the most popular ink direct-to-garment printer in the marketplace. And so, you know, people are realizing that the majority of the orders are white shirts, and they can do the majority of the orders. If you get into specialized things like black shirts, maybe they need to be screen printed. Okay, all right, but there's an alternative method too. But let's talk about how printing is done on dark shirts. Now, the screen printers, for example, when they're working on a colored background, especially a dark one, they know that they have to use white as a base for the colors to stand out from something like black. Okay, on a lighter color, say a light blue, if they need the color white in the design, again, they want to put down a base of white. So they're cheating, okay, because what they're going to do looks like this. They're going to start with a dark surface, and they're going to put a layer of white ink down. They cheated, okay? They added white to that surface, and then they put their design on top, okay? And they still left their design with openings where the white is because the white ink in the background is coming through, okay? That's how they do it with screen printing. The direct-to-garment printers, and the ones that offer white ink, tend to be more expensive than the ones that don't. Okay, so when you start talking about white ink on a DTG, they're using that same kind of process. They actually have to do a color separation in this case to be able to create a layer for the white ink. They apply white ink first, and then they put the design on top. Now, if you've ever looked at screen printing, the white ink looks like pudding. Okay, it's really thick. If you look at DTG and digital transfers, we're using a very liquid-based type of ink, and because it has to go through the print heads. Okay, and therefore, we have a couple of challenges with a DTG in that the white ink is kind of runny, okay, very liquidy. And the other problem is when you do it with screen printing, you use a burst of heat using a special mechanical device called a flash cure to cure that white ink before we put the rest of the ink on top. We don't have the ability on DTG, so they designed an ink that chemically begins to self-cure or stabilize immediately upon coming in contact with air. So we basically apply that first layer of white, and it has to immediately stabilize so that it can handle ink on top. And the challenge, and this is where you hear some of that negativity with DTG, is if you let the ink stay in the heads too long, it'll harden in the heads, and it'll actually ruin the heads, and it'll cost you anywhere from $600 to $800, depending on the make and model of the machine, to replace those heads. So it's vital with DTG that you take the white ink basically out of the head when you're not using it, so it can't cure inside the head. And that becomes the big white ink challenge that you might have heard about. Got to maintain those heads, or you're going to have a problem with it. And that means that every time we go to set up shirts to do white ink, we actually need to run one or two or more to actually get the coverage right before we go into production. And when we're done, we got to flush and clean. However that's done, it's different on every machine out there. Okay. Well, what about transfers? Well, when we're talking about the digital transfers like those using ChromaBlast, there is no white ink in those. Okay. So as long as we're working on white, things are going pretty good because we got the color white showing through where we need it. But what if we want to do a transfer on a dark surface and we need the color white as part of the design, okay? Or, it doesn't even have to be a dark surface. It could be a medium colored surface. Anything besides white, if we need the color white in the image, then we're going to have to find a way to produce that, or else you're going to see the color of the background showing through when we put it on that colored garment. All right, well, there's an alternative with transfers, and the steps are roughly the same, but the actual production is different, okay? And what we do here is instead of actually printing on that release paper, we're going to put it on a white paper with an adhesive backing, very, very lightweight type of paper, has an adhesive backing that's activated with heat. It's similar to that old school transfer process, but 1,000 times better in quality and reliability and durability because of all the improvements in our technology. And basically what you would do is you print the image onto that white paper, and then you want to trim away all the excess white paper. Otherwise, when you go to put it on, you can have what looks like a big, glob of white. Okay, let's say that we print it on a rectangular paper. If we applied it straight on, we'd have a big white piece of rectangular paper with the image on it on the garment. It wouldn't look good. So we do something we call contour cutting, where we trim up to it, and it looks a little bit like this. Okay, if we took the Rebels here and we print it out onto that transfer paper, we got a big sheet of paper you can see outlined in gray there. And the backside has an adhesive, so we lay it on the garment, face up, put the heat press on there, and it activates the adhesive so that whole new thing, that emblem, that transfer, sticks on there permanently. But you don't want all that extra paper, okay? So by contour cutting, using a CAD cutter, an XY type cutter, you can actually trim away all that excess paper so that the only thing is left is the pure graphic. Now, remember, the graphic paper was white, so we left the areas like inside the helmet here open so that the paper color shines through because it's actually permanent. The paper here is part of the process. And paper is probably not a great description, but the material. And then we are going to apply it with heat. Bam, we're welding it into place. And what you get is a very low cost, very simplistic, once we get through the setup process, method of being able to put images onto dark garments without having to use white ink. We don't have the expense of dealing with white ink, and we don't have the expense of buying a DTG machine that uses white ink. As you'll see, and Kurt will come out and talk to you a little about, USCutter specializes in what? Cutters, okay? And a cutter is typically a lot less expensive than a DTG machine. So keeping all that in mind. So when we sum it all up, the ChromaBlast product, I want to be clear on this, the ChromaBlast product is designed for cotton printing, okay? And it'll work with cotton blends as well, okay? So when you're using ChromaBlast, you're doing it on a surface composed of cotton or a polycotton. Now, truly, if you wanted to go to a polymer-based surface like polyester, you would actually use a whole different type of printing style ink and technology. Okay, so keep that in mind, because one of the things learning about digital printing is matching the ink, the type of ink, chemically with the surface that's being decorated, because ink has to bond. And if you may have done other processes, if you did embroidery, it stitches. With screen printing, it's bonding too. I know a lot of you are doing cutters, you're doing vinyl and everything else. You have some type of bonding agent there. But here, when we're using pure ink on the surface, the chemistry of the ink must tie into the chemistry of the surface. So ChromaBlast is designed specifically for cotton and polycotton materials. Okay, if you're going to work with a polyester material, you would have to go to a different type of ink. So that's just one of the things to keep in mind. But when you look again at some of your aspects here, very inexpensive to get into, inexpensive to produce, fairly simple to work with. I can even do it. Unlimited colors, no color separations, and excellent short-run production solution. Okay, very quick and that to the point, and that's what we really want to see. Okay, and I'm going to kind of wrap up my part here, and then we're going to bring Kurt back, and we're going to talk about other things. Okay, a couple of different things to do with, answer your questions and show you a couple of packages and stuff there. But words to live by for making money with digital decoration, okay, digital printing. Trust me, I've been in this business many years as a business owner, okay, and one of the things is that always comes up is price. I know this isn't a pricing webinar, but I just always got to make a comment on price, something to always remember. Never focus on price in this industry, okay? I mean, we always do it. Always remember, someone else will do it for less, okay? If I pay you to take it, if I give it to you for free, I blew my line. If I give it to you for free, someone will pay you to take it. Never forget that, okay? It never ends. You want to focus on one thing. You want to focus on being the best, on being unique, on being creative, on being different. That's what's going to make you money in the business, probably more than anything else. So always keep that in mind as you go through here. Find the right tools that you need to make things happen, okay, and then apply those tools and go out and make the money. So Carl's going to come back in from USCutter, and I'm going to take you and show you a couple of spots on their website here he wants to talk about. Just as a quick reminder, if you have questions, click on that red box with a white arrow, and I see I already have some questions coming in, and text it over to me, and then we'll start going through the question list here in just a moment. So Carl, are you back?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, those are hideous colors. I had no control over that. But let's just, I know Carl had a couple of packages he wanted you to see, and I'm going to take you and show you the one here on the top first, and we're going to go to the website. So bear with me just a minute, and it's a little slow here, but I'm sure we'll go there real quickly. If we don't, I will actually go and take the shortcut. And the shortcut is, okay, we'll take a look at, nope, that's the second one. Let's do the other one first. Okay, here we go, Carl. There's a package on the screen that if you want to talk a little bit about that, you're welcome to go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple things I just want to tell everybody out there about digital decoration. I know I've talked to a lot of people that are USCutter customers and they're buying a vinyl cutter for the first time, and even if they're buying one of our value cutters, question I get asked quite a bit is hey, this is a risk. Is this an investment that's going to pay off? So I go through that conversation with a lot of people. And I owned a sign business for 7 years, and one of the things I tell people that are jumping into the vinyl business is that, man, you can pay for your vinyl cutter and your initial startup supplies almost within 4 to 5 jobs, depending on what they are. And you've paid for everything, and your investment's taken care of, and the risk is gone. I just wanted to add, when it comes to digital decoration, and if you start to think about, hey, what can I add to my business right now? There's a lot of things that you can do and a lot of directions you can go with a vinyl cutter. Today we're focusing on doing apparel or T-shirts. I just want to tell everybody that I think that digital decoration with ChromaBlast, which is Sawgrass's product, a heat press, whatever you do, is not much of a risk at all. And I say that because if you're selling a vinyl product or some kind of graphic out of vinyl to a customer, whether they're putting on a car, a sign, anything, I can almost guarantee you that they're doing that usually for a business purpose or an organization. And they will absolutely love to have their logo on some type of a piece of apparel, especially a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. And when they find out that you're able to not only offer them vinyl cut graphics with their logo or what they want, but t-shirts, you will have easily more than 50% of those people will be customers for t-shirts and this digital decoration process. And I say that to you because this will pay for itself in a relatively short amount of time. And I just wanted to convey that.
Well, you make an excellent point, because I know a lot of your customers are already in that in business, and there was a recent survey that determined that it cost roughly 6 times more to get a new customer than to service an existing customer. And for the people out there that are already in business, they're already doing the signs, as you were saying, for their customers, then to be able to add in the t-shirt, it's just a matter of telling people, hey, I do this. And we just we got more a piece of the pie, as I like to say. Okay, we got more revenue from the existing customer base with very, very little effort, as opposed to actually going out, knocking on doors, getting new customers. Yeah, we always got to get new customers, but anything you can do that you can immediately deliver to your existing base, that's easy money, because you already have the customer, and now you're just giving them more things they can buy from you.
Yeah, exactly. So let me just jump into our Dye Sub Pro package for cotton, and let me just emphasize cotton. When you're buying ChromaBlast, you are using this on cotton shirts. There is other products if you're using a polyester, a polyblend shirt that we also offer, and we'll be doing a webinar in several weeks on that. But right now we're focusing on cotton. So in the picture here, for $643.99, what you're getting is the Ricoh 3300 printer, and it comes with a set of 4 Sawgrass ChromaBlast R cartridges, and it's the most simple thing in the world. You just pop open the door for the cartridges, and you just lock them into place, and you have to load the software and the drivers, as Jimmy described, but pretty much you're ready to start printing. Also, there's some things that are below the printer in the picture there that they're not obvious what they are, but the transfer sheets that Jimmy talked about, it comes with 100 sheets of the ChromaBlast transfer paper, and that's what you're going to be printing on. And we also offer, just as a startup package, a set of t-shirts with that. So you got a 5-pack of t-shirts that go with it. Now we offer this as for people that may already have a heat press, and you're maybe cutting vinyl or using the heat press for some other things. But if you don't, we also offer right here in this package, you can add a heat press for $819. It happens to be a Geonite. So that's the first one. And now Jimmy's going to go show a little more deluxe version of a package that offers a vinyl cutter and a heat press. So now you're looking at this, which is a Ricoh 3300.
Oops, sorry.
Oop, yep, we're on the sublimation one.
There we are. Is that it?
Okay. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, that's it.
Okay.
So what we have here is the same Ricoh 3300 we talked about. You'll see we've added one of our value heat presses in there. That's a 15-inch by 15-inch digital clamshell. And you recognize the t-shirts, again, the 4 sets of the ink for the Ricoh 3300, and we also have the transfer paper, just as the other one. The one other thing we added here was a vinyl cutter. I know a lot of you have vinyl cutters, but for those of you that don't, that are just looking at this package as its own business opportunity, we have the GraphTech Craft Robo Pro, which has contour cutting.
That's a great unit too. I've used it.
Yep. And so that allows you to after you've cut, or excuse me, printed a transfer like Jimmy was showing you, it allows you to cut out around the particular transfer. And if you hunt around our video on our site a little bit, we have a section just under videos, and we do a pretty good video just demonstrating contour cutting with sublimation, and you can see how that works. And you can use this vinyl cutter for things other than just doing t-shirts, but it's pretty handy with sublimation. And so we're offering this for $1699.99, this whole set. And the other thing I should mention about the other thing is these packages ship for $9.99, so there's a flat rate fee of shipping that's we're famous for. But those are the products. Those are at our website. They're fairly easy to navigate to. If you get to our website, they're in a couple of different sections. One is just under dye sublimation equipment. You'll see it right there. The other place to go is right into where we have our kits, and you'll see our professional packages.
Okay, Carl, you ready for
everything there is in stock and ready to ship. They'll ship from either Memphis, probably Memphis or Seattle, and so 2 to 3 days to most of the United States.
Okay. Well, are you ready for some questions?
I am.
Okay, I think a couple of them we've actually answered. The first one was what type of shirts can be used? Cotton. Yes, cotton is what this particular ChromaBlast product is designed for, specifically for to be used with cotton. So I think that answered that one. And the next one is related to that, is the same ink for license plate, mouse pads, coasters, etc. No, that is a different type of ink. The ChromaBlast is designed specifically for cotton, and then there are other types of inks, double jet inks, which are designed for polymer fibers. And when you're doing that type of decoration for, like, say, license plates and mouse pads, those are items that are either composed of polymer fibers or have polymer fiber coatings. I mean, obviously, a license plate, whether it be metal or plastic, has a polymer coating on top. So that becomes a different chemical, a different ink, a little bit different chemically.
And Sawgrass is very big into that product line too, even though we're not talking about it right now. And USCutter sells the full Sublejet line of inks for those particular items. And we are going to be doing a webinar specifically on those sublimatable materials that Jimmy just mentioned in the next 3 weeks. You'll be, if you're on the email, if you got an email from us to go to this webinar, you'll be getting one in the next couple weeks for the next one.
Okay, Carl, here's one that is specific to USCutter. It says, we currently own a vinyl cutting machine, and they reference a USCutter MH721. And some questions about is there a compatible software that can be used with that machine? And to be honest with you, I have no clue, because this, that's you, not me. So anyway, they're asking about compatible software for running their USCutter MH721, and that's pretty much all it says.
Yeah, so the idea that they have is, again, they're wanting to use their vinyl cutter to cut the transfers after they're printed using the Ricoh 3300, and that requires a process called contour cutting. And so the MH721 is not a contour cutter, even though it's one of our most popular items or popular cutters. It does not have the ability to contour cut. So to do that, you're going to need a cutter to contour that can contour cut. So that would include, in our value series, the USCutter Laser Point, or in our professional series, you would see the GraphTech Craft Robo Pro, any of the GraphTech cutters that we featured, as well as the ZenCut cutters, are all have the ability to contour cut. So the software compatibility is it's not going to work to contour cut with the 721 in this process.
Okay. Is there a quality difference between the Epson Workforce 30 and the Ricoh 3300?
So Jimmy, I can answer that, though you might be a little more qualified on it. We sell both of those. I mean,
Right.
I think the big thing is that one is a bulk ink system and the other one's a cartridge-based system. And you might want to elaborate on the pros and cons of those, or I can give you my opinion of them.
Well, I'll let you go ahead and give your opinion.
Okay, so the Workforce 30 is definitely a cheaper printer. The part that I like about the Ricoh 3300 is it's not that much more expensive than the Workforce 30. And the Ricoh 3300 is a better overall printer. It's a little more expensive if you were just to go out in the market and look at it. The other thing is I think it's simpler to operate. It's a cartridge-based system, so you just plug in the cartridges and you're ready to go. The Epson Workforce 30 requires a bulk ink system that you have to do a little bit of retrofitting with the Workforce 30. The other thing is, my understanding is with the cartridge-based system on the Ricoh 3300, you can let those inks stay in there for a while. You're not as susceptible to having the inks dry out in the cartridge-based system versus the Workforce 30. Jimmy, can you elaborate? I mean, I want to make sure that I covered that properly.
Well, you know, I'm a big fan of the Ricoh, and that's why I wanted to let you go first, because I'm such a big fan of the Ricoh that I'm not a big fan of the Epson Workforce 30. We'll just leave it at that, okay? But here are some of the reasons why I like the Ricoh. First of all, the Ricoh is faster. I mean, it prints faster. I mean, it is lightning fast compared to the Epson Workforce 30, okay, number one. Number two, what you're talking about with inks has a lot to do with the self-maintenance capabilities of the Ricoh. Now, any ink out there that you let it sit for too long, it does start to dry out, and it really dries out in the heads more than it does necessarily in a cartridge, because the head has some exposure to air. The key to preventing things from drying out is, of course, using them. And what happens is a lot of times people, when they're first starting out, they're not using their printer a lot, and they're letting it sit for long periods of time, and some drying can start to occur. The key for keeping that from happening is to force just teeny tiny small amount of ink through there periodically. And the Ricohs, as long as you leave them powered up, and that's important, because if you turn them off, nothing's going to happen. They'll actually do self-maintenance on their heads, whereas the Epson does not. And that's where you see a big difference with the Ricoh. But, you know, the speed is fantastic. I like the plug-in cartridges because I think they're easier to use. You just plug it in and run with it. And everything I've done with the Ricoh, I've just been really happy with. I know for a lot of people, Epson's well known and Ricoh is not. And they may be, you know, a little uncomfortable because they don't recognize the Ricoh as well as, but trust me, Ricoh's been around a long time. Very well built machine. Okay, next question. We need to add images to black ballistic nylon, 1050 denier. What is needed for that material, and what are the problems? First of all, let me say that when we're going to do digital transfers, we're certainly going to have to find the ink that matches the surface, okay? And nylon, of course, is a man-made type of filament as opposed to cotton. So first of all, ChromaBlast is not going to work on nylon. The second is we have to look at the application process. If we went to a pure sublimation ink like Sublijet to go on nylon, it would certainly bond properly with nylon, but it requires 400 degrees Fahrenheit to cure properly and to actually cause a transfer, which is typically going to melt nylon. Now, with that said, because I feel like I just left you hanging, if you would actually now I don't know, Carl may have some products in his lineup for this, but if not, Stephen, contact me directly. I'll put my email up here in just a second, and I can steer you in the direction of some nylon, some inks that we produce that are actually targeted towards nylon, if that'll help. Carl, I didn't know if you carried anything for nylon or not.
No, not at this point.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the things you always got to remember with these processes is not only does it have to be chemically compatible with the surface, it has to withstand the heat that may be required, to make that surface bond properly, in this case 400 degrees. By the way, there is my email and there's Carl's email so that you can follow it with additional questions down the road. Okay, looking at the questions. The question, I think we just covered it, but how long between uses of printer before head clogging is concerned? There's many variables in that. It has to do with the environment that you're in, which printer you're using, that type of thing. For people that aren't printing on a routine basis, we suggest that, every couple of days that they probably just do a real quick print head check, which takes care of that issue. You can certainly talk to our tech support for specific printers. Theoretically, you just don't want it. You don't want it to sit there for like 2 or 3 weeks or months without doing anything with it. But the Ricoh will actually clean itself periodically for the most part.
So, Jimmy, just talking about your tech support for a bit, I just wanted to jump in here, and I know that digital printing, dye sublimation can seem a little bit maybe intimidating in terms of what. For people that have never done it before, and the same thing can be said with vinyl cutting when you're getting into vinyl cutting for the first time. But I think this holds true for digital decoration as it does for vinyl cutting. Is we have a group of support people here that know the product, that are taking calls, that get people up and running. We're designed around people that are getting into business on this type of stuff for the first time. And I can easily say that also Sawgrass is an extremely helpful partner for people getting up and running for the first time. They have a tremendous amount of resources internally with people, as well as information on their website that can get you off the ground and going if you were to run into any barriers. Jimmy, do you want to elaborate a little bit on what you guys have for people that may be intimidated?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the first thing we always do suggest people, to go to their dealer who sold them the product, initially. And if the dealer feels like it needs to come to us, they're going to direct you to us. That doesn't mean that you can't call us direct anytime you want. We'll certainly take your call. I mean, we have an 800 number, a wonderful staff here in Charleston, South Carolina. You want to keep that in mind if you're on the West Coast, that we're on the East Coast time frame here, okay? But we got a great staff who can walk you through, your problems, and they really do understand the different printers, the different inks. In addition, if you go into our website, sawgrassink.com, we have lots of videos and training aids there to help you out to be able to, for example, you're setting up that 3300 the first time with ChromaBlast ink. Well, we got a video for that. It's easy to do, like Carl said, but it's there. Same thing with installing the driver. In fact, our software drivers, they're always the most current version on the website you can download. So we have lots of resources here to help you out, and that's the key. I've had people approach me at shows and say, listen, I'm having a problem with this, and they kind of like want me to fix it on the spot, which I can't do. But my response always is, have you called our tech support? And I find out anybody with a lingering problem never called tech support. So that's what we're here for. We're not offended for you to call. So please do if you're having kind of issues. Okay, next question. Can I use the 3300 for both ChromaBlast and SubleJet inks? Well, here's the thing. Yes, a 3300 will run both the ChromaBlast and SubleJet, but not at the same time. And what that means is that when you'd finish with the ChromaBlast inks, you would have to pull the cartridges and then completely clean the heads out. You have to get all that ink out before you switch, which is a waste of ink and a waste of time. That the Ricoh 3300 is such a low-cost printer that if you were to actually go and buy 2 printers, one for ChromaBlast, one for SubleJet, you don't have to buy 2 heat presses. And if you're using a cutter, you don't have to buy 2 cutters. You're just buying one extra printer. and loading it up. And that's really a lot more efficient than trying to switch back and forth. Okay, next question. I currently have a Ricoh 3300 set up with sublimation for mugs. Do I need a different printer for t-shirts, or do I need different paper? Well, the key there, Julie, is if you're going to go to t-shirts, you don't need a different printer to do t-shirts. You would need a different ink based on what the t-shirt is composed of. If you have a printer set up right now for sublimation for mugs, and I'm assuming you have Sublijet inks, which are designed for polyester and polymer fibers, they'll work on the poly-performance apparel with no problem. If you want to do 100% cotton t-shirts, then you're going to need a different ink, the ChromaBlast ink, and it's really best to have a separate printer for that, okay? And it's just simply because it's a different type of ink. But, you know, with the popularity of poly-performance apparel right now, Sublijet inks are used specifically for that type of surface because it's polyester. So I think that answers your question there. Okay. Where can I get educated on materials and process for doing other than just white all poly shirts? That's a big question there, Marcus. You can certainly contact USCutter. You can contact me directly. I've done many presentations, and I have videos that I can link you to or whatnot about some of the different processes and whatnot. And it really helps if you lay out specifically what it is you're interested in doing, so it can better educate you on the capabilities of doing that particular thing, if that makes sense to you. Okay. What is the plus of the power driver on your website? Well, if you're buying our products, okay, whether it be the ChromaBlast or we've started talking some about the Sublijet, the driver that we created, what it does is a couple of things. Number one is it helps to manage the printer, okay, and it's really as much about management of the color and the transfer of the design as anything else. You still have to have the printer driver for that printer. So if you buy the Ricoh 3300, you still install the printer driver for the Ricoh that comes with it. And then you would put in our driver, whether it be the ChromaBlast driver or the Sublijet power driver. And that serves as a go-between between your software and the printer, okay? And what the neat thing about it is we have a color palette in both the driver for the ChromaBlast and for the Sublijet. That color palette has been designed to make the color management between what you see on the screen and what you get on the outside a whole lot easier. And it's designed such that you can install that palette into either CorelDRAW or Photoshop and even Illustrator, so that when you're working with designs in the graphic software, if you're using the color palette that's associated with that driver, okay, that we created, then the accuracy of your color from the screen to the driver, final driver, is drastically improved. In addition, it has some settings in the driver to help you manage the printing process. So that's what it's really all about. Okay, it doesn't cost you anything to install it, and we certainly recommend that you do. Okay, that pretty much wraps up the questions I have sitting here. So, Carl, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day. I want to thank you for inviting me out. And again, everyone, here's my email address. If you have questions specifically for me afterwards, I'll be glad to help you out. And Carl, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap things up.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everybody that attended this webinar, and hopefully it was informative in introducing you to digital decoration, specifically the ChromaBlast for the cotton shirts. And again, we're here as a resource, on our website, and you have my email there. And any other follow-up questions you have, feel free to call us at 425-481-3555 and hit the sales button. Okay, thanks everybody, and have a great day.